It was supposed to be a standard DOJ oversight hearing. Kristen Clarke, the U.S. Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, was expected to give numbers, updates, and neutral testimony. And for 40 minutes, she did. Until Senator John Kennedy asked one question. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it froze the entire room. Because the moment he said it, Clarke didn't answer. She paused, she blinked, and then, for just a second, she looked caught. That silence, it said everything. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments, because this one starts quiet and ends louder than words. The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber was half full when Clarke took her seat at the witness table. Cameras pointed, notepads flipped. Reporters quietly whispered names of expected flashpoints: hate crimes, police reform, electoral access. What no one expected was John Kennedy to skip all of them. But before we get to that moment, let's rewind. Kristen Clarke, head of the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ, opened with a practiced 5-minute statement. Our division continues to investigate and enforce statutes protecting civil rights in voting, housing, education, and criminal justice. In the last 12 months alone, we've launched 43 investigations into misconduct, filed 19 lawsuits, and reached 11 settlements involving unconstitutional policing practices. Behind her, printed binders, slide deck, color-coded bar chart on easel. The chart showed rising enforcement activity by year, by state, by violation category. Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, all colored in bright red, signaling active investigation zones. Kennedy watched without blinking. She concluded her opening with a quote from the late Justice Thurgood Marshall and folded her statement neatly in front of her. Then came questions. Senator Durbin asked about voter suppression. Senator Booker asked about hate crime statistics. Senator Feinstein asked about mental health referrals during police training reform. Clarke answered all of them with poise, clipped detail, and not a hint of unease. We're pursuing equal protection. We're ensuring consistent enforcement. We follow the law, not politics. She even smiled when answering hypothetical scenarios. And then it was Kennedy's turn. No notes, no binder, no charts, just a legal pad and a pen, half uncapped, half forgotten. He leaned into the microphone and spoke slowly. Ms. Clarke, I noticed your map highlights the states under active investigation for civil rights violations related to policing. She nodded, ready. Yes, Senator. That includes use of force reviews, pattern and practice inquiries. He raised a hand slightly, not to interrupt, but to pivot. Right. And would you say those investigations are distributed based on the volume of complaints? Clarke nodded again. Yes, the data drives our decisions. We respond where violations are reported. And how many of those complaints came from, say, San Francisco? That made her pause. She glanced at her binder, flipped to a side tab. I'd have to pull exact numbers, but fewer than in, say, Baton Rouge or Jacksonville. Kennedy didn't move. And yet, based on publicly available footage, incidents involving disproportionate charges, vandalism with no follow-up, and unequal arrest protocols have all occurred there. He waited a beat. Why no pattern of practice investigation there? Now she shifted. Senator, each case requires evidence thresholds. We rely on partnerships with local jurisdictions. Without access, are you saying local governments can shield themselves from scrutiny by simply not cooperating? Another pause. Clarke's tone remained steady, but her fingers tapped faintly on the binder. I'm saying we pursue cases where both the volume and the documentation of harm meet investigatory standards. Kennedy smiled faintly, and then did something no one expected. He slid the chart away from his desk, didn't look at it, didn't touch it again. Ms. Clarke, I'm not asking about the chart. The room went quiet. He leaned in again. I'm asking if selective justice, in the name of politics, is still justice at all. That wasn't a policy question. It was a line designed to make people freeze. And it worked, because Clarke didn't respond, not right away. And in that brief silence, Kennedy didn't fill the gap. He let it sit, a question with no answer, because maybe the answer wasn't on the chart. Clarke had recovered quickly. She turned the conversation back to data, enforcement integrity, and community trust building. But Kennedy wasn't interested in abstractions anymore. He reached to his left and pulled a single-page printout from his folder. Then he held it up to the mic, still seated. "Madam Chair, I'd like to enter this into the record." The chair, Senator Blackburn, glanced at the paper. "Accepted, proceed." Kennedy handed the page to the clerk, then motioned toward the monitor on the side wall. "Can we roll the footage?" Everyone's heads turned. The screen blinked once, then lit up with grainy but clear body cam footage. Date stamped May 3rd, 2024. Location, Tenderloin District, San Francisco. Audio on. The footage showed two uniformed officers approaching a protest gathering. Masked individuals in black hoodies spray painting the wall of a federal building. One man holding a pipe, using it to bang on a window. Another lighting a flare, not a candle, and tossing it into the stairwell. The officers stepped forward. Then, visible hesitation. They turned, radioed in, and left. No arrests, no commands, no attempt to disperse. Kennedy let the clip run for 15 full seconds longer than necessary. Then the screen cut to black. No one in the room moved. He looked at Clarke. "Ms. Clarke, do you recognize that district?" She nodded carefully. "Yes, that's San Francisco." "And do you recognize the type of federal property involved?" "That appears to be a federal courthouse, yes." "And would you say, based on the video, that a crime was being committed?" She hesitated. "I'm not a fact finder in this context. Ma'am, I'm asking if lighting a flare and throwing it into a courthouse stairwell counts as criminal conduct." A longer pause. "It appears unlawful, yes. And yet no DOJ investigation, no charges, no follow-up by your division. Is that correct?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her binder again. Kennedy stopped her. "I've already checked. The footage was verified. The incident was referred upward and declined. No further action taken." Now Clarke's expression hardened slightly. "Senator, our division doesn't prosecute. We refer findings. You refer what you choose to pursue, and you chose not to pursue this." He let that sentence sit, then added, "But you opened full investigations in Baton Rouge for graffiti on a police car, in Houston for an officer's language during a traffic stop, and in Little Rock over what amounted to a misdemeanor verbal dispute." He leaned forward, tone quiet. "I'm not saying those cases didn't deserve review. I'm asking why this one didn't." The room had grown still, not just quiet, still, because when footage speaks, excuses sound like noise. Clarke tried once more. "We assess all complaints based on the totality of evidence, community risk, and statutory authority. Statutory authority doesn't explain the inconsistency, it explains the discretion. And discretion, Madam Clarke, is where bias hides." The sentence didn't echo, but it landed, because everyone in the room understood what wasn't being said. That selective justice isn't a glitch in the system. It's a choice. And Kennedy had just shown America one. Senator Kennedy leaned back slightly in his chair, pen now tapping once against the legal pad in front of him. The footage was still fresh in everyone's minds. He let the silence sit a little longer. Then, with no emotion in his voice, he asked, "Ms. Clarke, how many DOJ pattern and practice investigations have you opened in states that consistently vote Republican over the past 2 years?" Clarke stiffened. She adjusted her mic, nodded once, and flipped to a tab in her binder. "Approximately 29, Senator." "And how many in states that consistently vote Democrat?" She hesitated, her fingers slowed. "Less, fewer than 10. Would you say 3? She didn't respond. Kennedy looked down, then up again. "That's the number I got from your office's own annual summary. 3 versus 29. Clarke opened her mouth to reply, but Kennedy wasn't done. "Now let's try another one." He flipped a single index card. "Of the top 10 cities in America with the highest violent crime increases in 2024, how many have open pattern and practice investigations?" Clarke glanced toward one of her aides seated behind her. Kennedy didn't wait. 2, only 2, Chicago and Albuquerque. He turned the card over. Not New Orleans, not Oakland, not Philadelphia. "Why not Philadelphia, Ms. Clarke?" Clarke's throat moved, but her voice didn't come right away. We have ongoing community-based monitoring. I didn't ask about monitoring. I asked why your office hasn't opened a formal investigation. We haven't ruled it out, but you haven't ruled it in either. Her lips pressed together. Kennedy kept going. Philadelphia has seen a 46% rise in aggravated assaults, over 200 known incidents of prosecutorial refusal to pursue gun charges, and yet, nothing. He let that sit. Now, what do New Orleans, Oakland, and Philadelphia have in common? Clarke didn't answer, so he did. Each run by the same party, each with declining prosecution rates, each with well-known political leadership that aligns with this administration. And not a single one has triggered a full DOJ investigation from your office. Clarke finally found her voice. Senator, we don't base investigations on political geography. No, then why does the map say otherwise? He gestured toward the earlier chart, the one she'd presented at the beginning of the hearing. It was still on display, still red in all the expected places. Kennedy stood up, walked to the easel, and circled one city with his pen. St. Louis? You opened an investigation here for police misconduct after 2 questionable arrests. He drew a second circle. Jacksonville. Opened for excessive force patterns tied to 3 unrelated incidents. Then he turned back to Clarke. Philadelphia had 74 dropped felony weapons charges in 1 quarter. That's not misconduct. That's collapse. He walked back to his seat. And still, you didn't name it. Her voice was colder now, but still quiet. We assess risk and evidence, not political alignment. Kennedy's eyes narrowed. Not angrily, but like a prosecutor ready to rest his case. You say that, but cities are bleeding. And the map's not following the blood. It's following the vote. The sentence didn't shout. It whispered, loud enough to make the gallery still. And Kristen Clarke, one of the most powerful civil rights officials in the country, sat with her hands folded and her mouth closed. Because she knew that wasn't just an accusation. It was a pattern she hadn't been able to answer. The red light on the microphone began to blink. Senator Blackburn, serving as chair, gently tapped her nameplate. Senator Kennedy, your time has expired. Kennedy gave a polite nod, the kind that suggests compliance, but not surrender. He looked down at his pad, then up again. Madam Chair, if I may, just one follow-up. Blackburn hesitated. Clarke was already stacking her documents, assuming the questioning had concluded. But Blackburn read the room. Or maybe she just knew Kennedy well enough by now. She nodded once. Go ahead. Kennedy looked back at Clarke. Ms. Clarke, you've made repeated references to trust building with communities most affected by civil rights violations. She nodded again, more cautious this time. Yes, that's foundational to our mission. And you've testified that investigations are opened when there's a documented pattern of harm? Correct. He pulled a paper from his folder. Not flashy, not dramatic. Just a public court document. This is a sworn affidavit from a prosecutor in Chicago who was instructed by her superior to drop charges on a first-degree assault case involving a known repeat offender. The victim, a 17-year-old girl. Reason for dismissal? Quote, public perception and office optics. He let the words hang there. Clarke stayed still. Kennedy asked quietly, does that qualify as a pattern of harm? If substantiated, it could. It is substantiated. The prosecutor resigned and filed the affidavit under oath. She adjusted her posture, suddenly less assured. Kennedy continued, your office didn't investigate, didn't review, didn't even contact the state DA's office. Why? Clarke didn't answer right away. Kennedy pressed again. Because the office in question aligned politically with yours? That's not how our process works. But it's how it's being seen. And Madam Clarke, perception matters in justice. Because when justice looks selective, it becomes something worse. Inequity in a suit and tie. That line landed, hard. A few murmurs buzzed from the back gallery. Not loud, but audible. Kennedy paused. Not for effect, but to give room for her to push back. She didn't. Instead, she lowered her gaze. Not with guilt, but with recognition. She knew this wasn't just a rhetorical flourish. It was a shift. Kennedy softened slightly. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to ask whether the Department of Justice still sees blindfolds as part of the uniform, or if it now picks which scales to weigh. He placed the paper on the table and folded his hands. Because if we only enforce laws where they match the headlines, then we're not doing law, we're doing theater. Chairwoman Blackburn looked down, then nodded. Thank you, Senator. She turned to the next nameplate, Senator Padilla. But as Padilla opened his folder, half the room was still looking at Kennedy, and the other half was looking at Clarke, waiting for a response that never came. The rest of the hearing passed in silence, not because the question stopped, but because the room had shifted. Even as Senator Padilla addressed voting protections and Senator Cruz pivoted to immigration, most of the committee, and more importantly, the audience, was still lingering on what Kennedy had said. Kristen Clarke stayed calm, but her eyes stayed lowered. Her answers became tighter, less confident, and when the gavel finally came down, ending the session, it was clear which moment would define the day. Except no one expected one more moment to slip through. C-SPAN had stopped broadcasting, but a live stream feed from a reporter's phone, which had stayed running for personal notes, caught something unofficial. As Clarke gathered her materials and spoke briefly with one of her aides, she said something not meant for the record. A whisper, but one that was picked up anyway. The aide leaned in, and Clarke said under her breath, "He's not wrong, but he plays dirty." She didn't know the mic was still live on the independent stream. She didn't know the footage was about to go public, and she didn't know how viral that one sentence would become. Within 20 minutes, the clip had been clipped, subtitled, and posted to X, formerly Twitter. The caption read, DOJ official on hot mic. He's not wrong, but he plays dirty. Referring to St. John Kennedy, the video racked up 1.4 million views in 2 hours. Comment sections exploded. Some accused Kennedy of bad faith tactics. Others praised his surgical questioning. But most latched on to what Clarke had said. Not just the words, but the tone. It wasn't anger. It wasn't outrage. It was admission. That Kennedy's question had merit. That the silence meant something. That maybe there was something to answer for. By 5:00 p.m., major outlets had picked it up. CNN ran the headline. DOJ civil rights chief caught on, Mike admitting Kennedy not wrong about bias. Fox News ran it louder. Kennedy exposes two-tier justice system. DOJ admits it off camera. Even NPR, usually more reserved, opened their 7 o'clock segment with, the question wasn't loud, it was legal, but it left the Justice Department scrambling for damage control. The official DOJ response came through a press email at 6:12 p.m. Assistant Attorney General Clarke was referring to procedural irregularities during the hearing and does not endorse any mischaracterization of the department's enforcement record. But by then, the moment had already outpaced the spin. Clarke tried to clarify later during a PBS interview, stating, I simply meant that Senator Kennedy's style of questioning, while effective, can sometimes conflate different enforcement priorities. It doesn't mean we agree on substance. But it was too late. The quote had become the substance. And for millions of Americans watching, it didn't sound like damage control. It sounded like the rarest thing in politics. A moment of unfiltered honesty, caught not by script, but by silence. It began quietly. A photo surfaced on Reddit of a poster taped to a bulletin board at Georgetown University's Law Center. White background, black serif font, no logo, no watermark, just one sentence. The silence wasn't hesitation, it was realization. Underneath it, in smaller font, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke, Senate Judiciary Oversight Hearing, July 2025. And below that, a single bold question. How many cities have we already lost? The post got 3,000 upvotes in 6 hours. No politics, no hashtags, no party lines. Just students, and then faculty sharing it quietly, screenshotting it, reposting it, printing their own, and then it spread. Within 48 hours, the same poster appeared on the corkboard at NYU Law, the side entrance of the University of Chicago Harris School, a hallway near the Political Science Department at UCLA, taped above a water fountain at Howard University, No official group claimed it. No student organization stamped it. But everyone on campus knew what it meant. It wasn't about Kennedy. It wasn't even about Clarke. It was about the question and the silence that followed. In one classroom at George Mason, a professor reportedly paused a lecture mid-sentence and pointed to a fresh copy of the poster on the back wall. "That's the new debate prompt," he said. "I don't care what party you're with. You answer that sentence or you're not ready to practice law." And that was the point, because what Kennedy had triggered wasn't a gotcha moment. It wasn't a soundbite. It was a shift in conversation. He hadn't accused Clarke of wrongdoing. He hadn't mocked her. He had just asked a question that everyone realized mattered. And no one could answer without stepping into uncomfortable territory. By the end of the week, the quote had been discussed on Morning Joe, referenced on Ben Shapiro's podcast, quoted in an op-ed by Fareed Zakaria, and printed on the back of a t-shirt worn by a panelist on Real Time with Bill Maher. Kristen Clarke, she made no further comments. The DOJ issued no further clarifications. And Kennedy? He hadn't spoken another word on the matter since leaving the hearing. But that was the brilliance of it, because while everyone else scrambled for context, rebuttals, and PR shields, Kennedy had done the one thing politicians rarely do. He let the silence do the talking. And the country was still listening. The hearing chamber emptied slowly. Senators slipped out. Aides hustled to pack briefcases. Microphones were unplugged. Cameras were wheeled back. Kristen Clarke was the first to leave the witness table. Stone-faced, wordless. Kennedy didn't move. He sat, pen in hand, looking at the final page of his legal pad. Nothing was written yet. His aide, Mark, approached him. "You want me to grab your coat, Senator?" Kennedy didn't respond immediately. Then he tapped the pen once on the table, turned the legal pad sideways, and wrote one sentence, in large, deliberate letters. "Truth isn't a weapon, it's a mirror. Use it carefully." He tore the page out and walked up to the whiteboard on the chamber wall, the one often used for budget figures or legislative breakdowns. There was nothing on it. He tacked the page to the board with a single pushpin. No speech, no comment, just left it there, turned, picked up his briefcase, and walked out. But that wasn't the only message. Later that afternoon, as his staff sorted paperwork in the Senate office, Mark opened Kennedy's binder to file away notes from the hearing. Inside, tucked between two folders, was a folded sheet of hotel stationery from the night before. In Kennedy's handwriting, sharper, more personal, was a short paragraph. No title, no signature, just these lines. "If we pretend the system is working just because we work inside it, we become the problem we were elected to fix. Justice isn't just blind, it's quiet. And if no one's willing to speak into that silence, then the silence starts to rot." No one knew who it was meant for. Maybe Clarke, maybe his staff, maybe himself. But Mark didn't file the note. He tucked it into his own pocket, because something about it felt permanent. The next morning, reporters asked Kennedy for comment on Clarke's hot mic moment. He declined. All he said was, "I asked a question. She answered with silence. The rest speaks for itself." And that was it. No gloating, no tweet storm, no interviews. Because Kennedy knew something most politicians don't. The most powerful words are the ones everyone else has to say for you. If Kennedy's question echoed louder than any answer, hit like, subscribe, and comment what you heard in her silence.